And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Thursday, May 2nd. We have a lot to talk about on the show today. Before I get into that, just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate, get your comments recognized, make sure to go to the following link. That is GSMCPodcast.net. Again, that really helps the show, makes the show more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Again, that is GSMCPodcast.net. And as always, it is displayed on the ticker at the bottom of the show segment down below. So, with that being said, let's get into what we are going to discuss for today's show. So, we're going to start off the show. We're going to talk about T. Higgins, more on him, and some trade speculation that comes along with that. Because him, along with a couple of other receivers, they've been involved in trade rumors, so we're gonna get back into T. Higgins because I know we've spent some time on Brandon Ayuk. You know, we bounced back and forth between those two guys, and now recently they're talking about Deebo Samuel maybe being traded, but we'll see. But we're gonna go back to T. Higgins, talk about him, updates on that. Then in the second part of the show, we'll talk about some NFL broadcasting news. So Jason Kelce is going to be joining Monday Night Countdown this season. Recently retired, and he's making the most of it. You know, he's still got the podcast with his brother, Travis Kelce. Now he's going to be joining ESPN's Monday Night Countdown, so we'll get into that. Also, another thing, too, NFL Today on CBS, they made some changes as well. They parted ways with Boomer Esiason and Phil Simms, and you're going to have now J.J. Watt and Matt Ryan joining the crew on CBS, so I want to get into that as well. So something a little bit different today is some broadcasting stuff, but I wanted to talk about that, give my opinion on it, on those two things. Then in the third part of the show, we'll talk about Jalen Johnson, him clarifying his comments on Caleb Williams, because I know he made some before the draft, before the Bears made the selection of drafting Caleb Williams, so he wanted to clear the air on that, so I wanted to get into that as well. And then in the final part of the show, we'll talk about the Patriots and the Giants and possible quarterback battles with those two teams, or at least one of them is going to be more of a quarterback battle. The other, Jacoby Brissett, inviting competition between him and the Patriots' number 3 overall pick, Drake May. So we'll get into that as well. So with that being said, let's get into the first topic, which is talking about T. Higgins and some updates on him. So recently, he's come out and said that he wants Michael Pittman money. That's the contract that he's looking at. Michael Pittman, a receiver that got paid earlier this offseason with the Colts. And T. Higgins wants a contract in that ballpark. Now, I don't know if that's going to end up happening. I mean, at least with the Bengals, it might not happen. Now, the article I was looking at, he never requested to become the highest paid receiver in the NFL, but he wants a deal similar to Pittman's 3-year, $70 million contract. And earlier this offseason, T. Higgins requested a trade, and then later on, he talked about how he loves Cincinnati, he wants to stay there, but according to Adam Schefter, who is reporting that T. Higgins is a little bit disappointed with the lack of talks about a long-term extension. And we'll see if the Bengals end up giving it to him, but odds are I would probably lean more towards they're not going to, and he's going to end up getting traded. And last year was kind of tough for T. Higgins, dealt with some injuries, but overall he's been a very productive receiver for the Bengals, and he's been a big part of their success the last couple of seasons. They got to back-to-back AFC Championship games. They had a Super Bowl appearance. He scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl, although it should have gotten called back because, you know, he threw Jalen Ramsey to the ground, but that's besides the point. He's been a very productive receiver for them. And losing him definitely is going to hurt if that's what's going to end up happening, because you got Joe Burrow, who's already paid. Jamar Chase is going to be paid. And like I say a lot, you're not going to be able to keep everybody. And T. Higgins, it looks like he's going to be the odd man out. And the Bengals, they've made some changes in their backfield. Look what happened with Joe Mixon. They traded him. They brought in Zach Moss. So, yeah, they got to go with cheaper options. And what they ended up doing in their draft, because that was the other thing I wanted to touch upon quickly, is what the Bengals did with their draft. So, their first selection, they took Amarius Mims out of Georgia, offensive tackle. They took Chris Jenkins, a defensive tackle from Michigan. And then this is what could end up being T. Higgins' replacement, and that is Jermaine Burton, third-round pick from Alabama. So their first 3 picks were from Georgia, Michigan, Alabama. That's not too bad. So I wanted to look at Jermaine Burton's stats, his college stats. And so we go back to... Okay, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. But he could very well be T. Higgins' replacement. And if you were to ask me who do they value more, whether it's T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, probably got to lean Jamar Chase. And again, that's no disrespect to T. Higgins, but I think that's just how it is. They value him as the better player, and they look at T. Higgins as being expendable. At least comparing the 2 wide receivers. And they can end up moving off of him. Now, is it a mistake? Yeah, but again, it's because of money. That's what it comes down to. And if T. Higgins is here, if T. Higgins is in Cincinnati in 2024, but not beyond that, well, this is an important year for the Bengals. Because this could be their last chance, at least with him. Now, if T. Higgins ends up being traded before the season and he goes somewhere else, are the Bengals in big trouble? No. I don't think so. I mean, they're going to feel the effects of his loss. But I still look at the Bengals as a very good team. If you got Joe Burrow coming back healthy, and you still got Jamar Chase, you still got most of the core there. On defense, you still got most of the guys there. I know some guys left in the secondary, but you still got most of that team there. And if Burrow's healthy, this team could go to the Super Bowl. That's their ceiling, is getting to a Super Bowl. But T. Higgins, yeah, they will feel the effects of that loss. So I wanted to get back into Jermaine Burton's stats. I apologize because I thought it was bringing me to his profile, but it ended up not doing that. So his final season with Alabama, 39 receptions, 798 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. He actually was with Georgia his first 2 years. 2020, 27 receptions, 404 yards, 3 touchdowns. 2021, 26 receptions, 497 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And then 2022, 40 receptions, 677 yards, and 7 touchdowns. So those are his statistics from college. He's a 6-foot wide receiver, 194 pounds. So, again, they're going to lose Tyler Boyd. He's in free agency. Odds are he's not coming back. T. Higgins, we'll see if he ends up getting traded. So the Bengals needed a replacement. And he might be replacing not just 1 but 2 wide receivers if they do indeed move off of T. Higgins. But I wanted to get back to, well, let me just get back to the Bengals draft. So, like I said, Amarius Mims, Chris Jenkins, Jermaine Burton, those are their first 3 picks. Then they took another defensive tackle, McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M in the 3rd round. They took 2 tight ends in this draft, which, yeah, you brought in Mike Gesicki, but they might need a long-term. They need a long-term answer at tight end. I don't think Mike Gesicki is that. So maybe one of these 2 guys, Eric All or Tanner McLaughlin from Arizona. One of these guys could eventually grow into that number 1 tight end, or they're just there for depth. They also did take a corner in the 5th round. They took Josh Newton from TCU. They took a defensive end, Cedric Johnson from Ole Miss. Then they took another defensive back, also from Ole Miss, Dejon Anthony. And then they took a center in the 7th round, Matt Lee from Miami. So they took some offensive linemen. They took a couple of tight ends. They took a lot of defensive guys, and a receiver. So they addressed some needs. And look, again, I've said it all along. If the Bengals are healthy, they're going to be a very good team. That's going to be a team that will bounce back if Joe Burrow is healthy. Because you go back to last year, Joe Burrow wasn't healthy to start the year. Still dealing with the calf injury for the beginning of the season. And then they really started to get it going. You go back to the Arizona game, Jamar Chase scored 3 touchdowns, and they really started to look like the Bengals. And then they played the 49ers. They beat them by a couple of scores. So they were on a roll. And then Burrow had the wrist injury, and that was it. And Jake Browning played well. Don't get me wrong. But Burrow going down, that marked the end of the season for the Bengals. So 2024, they're going to be a team I look at. They're going to be a bounce-back team if everything goes right. Now, again, injuries happen. But I'm expecting this Bengals squad to be very good. And with T. Higgins, we'll see if he's a part of that, if it's just for this year, and they end up trading him after this season. We'll keep an eye on it. Now, if you're the Bengals, you're hoping that... I mean, I don't think there's really any news on him possibly holding out for a new contract. I mean, he does feel disrespected. Well, at least what I have, he's disappointed, not disrespected. But still, I think he feels some disrespect that the Bengals are not really making it a priority to try to give him a long-term deal. But again, it comes down to money. I think that's really what it is. And teams don't have an infinite number of cap space. That's really what it comes down to. So, and on top of that, you have to pay Jamar Chase, and the Bengals are going to want to do that. I think they're going to prioritize paying Jamar Chase over T. Higgins. That's really what it comes down to. And T. Higgins is going to end up getting his money elsewhere. Now, where would be a good spot for him? I mean, there's plenty of teams that need receivers. You look at the Bills. They did draft a receiver, but, they traded Stephon Diggs. Now, I don't think the Bengals are going to trade him to the Bills unless the Bills give them a really good deal. But the Bills could be a spot. Listen, I always think of the Giants as being a spot. I know they drafted Malik Neighbors, but you add T. Higgins into the fold, and suddenly your receiving core is even better. And you got a number 1 and a number 2. You got a 1A and a 1B. Even. So I'm campaigning for the Giants to get more receivers, but that's another team I could think of. I think the Cardinals are another team because you have Marvin Harrison Jr. now. You got your number 1 wide receiver. But now if you added to T. Higgins, I mean that could be a possibility. Well, I'm just saying that's a team that could also use another receiver. I mean, they're not trading him to the Chiefs. The Chargers, I mean, the Chargers are they're not going to trade for him and then pay him. So they got their own issues with their cap. They actually, Tyler Boyd visited them, so it's possible he could sign there. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's other teams that I could go through, but those are just a few that come to mind. Because at least with like the Cardinals and the Giants, like those are in the opposite conference. So if you wanted to move off of him and trade him somewhere where you're not really going to see him, those are 2 spots. But, I mean, again, that's just 2 that I could think of off the top of my head. I mean, there's other teams as well, but, I mean, of course, I'm saying the Giants because, again, I'd like the Giants to get another receiver, but, again, they did a good job getting Neighbors, so. But like I always say, we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out. Again, for the Bengals, you're hoping that you could at least have T. Higgins for 2024. Maybe they trade him before the season starts. I don't know. We'll see. but I think at this point it's kind of inevitable that he's gonna be gone. So we'll see. But let me know what you guys think about the T Higgins stuff. Do you believe he will be traded? I think yes. I think at some point he is going to be traded. That's how it looks. But again, I could be wrong. So when we come back from our first break of the show, we're going to discuss some broadcasting stuff. Jason Kelsey joining Monday Night Countdown, so we'll get into that, as well as a couple things with CBS and the moves that they made as well. So with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.